Okay, yeah. I read his over.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, and welcome. I'm Kim Houston, the president of the Nelson County Economic Development Agency, and so honored to be able to bring to you again this year the Coffee with the Legislators in association with my Partners for Progress Tourism Chamber at Main Street, who always like to bring these gentlemen here to talk about what's going on and what's getting ready to happen. I'd like to acknowledge our local leaders, Mayor Higdon, Judge Watts, thank you all for coming. We have several fiscal court members and city council members here as well, so thank you all very much. Many of you all have been here. You know that how we kind of go through this. They're going to talk a little bit, but then they're going to be able to spend some time with you after it's over with. If you have some things one-on-one that you would like to talk about, not really wanting to raise your hand and mention anything, they've got some time for that. But it's my honor to be able to introduce to you our legislators representing us in Frankfort for Nelson County. I think we're very honored to be able to have that. Chad McCoy, State Representative, State Senator, Jimmy Higdon. Gentlemen.
No, go ahead. We had a coin flip there. It was a two-headed coin, so two-sided, it two-headed. I guess because of seniority, I won. This is actually, I was thinking on my way over, this is my 10th legislative coffee here in Nelson County. I'd like to thank Kim and Economic Development for putting this together, and my fellow elected officials that are here today. And thank you all for sending Chad McCoy to work with me. What a bright young man he is, and I think you've seen here recently with him being elected to House leadership. What an outstanding young man he is. Being elected to leadership it takes a special person, especially only in his second term. And it's there's 100 members to the House of Representatives. I think 61 in his caucus. So it's a real honor for him a real deal for him to be able to be the majority whip in the House of Representatives. So very proud of Chad. Proud that he won. I lost my first leadership race. I learned a lot from that, but I did lose my first time out. But it's good to see all of you here this morning. Thank you, and seeing Freddie Riggs up here in the front row, and want to say that ever since I was elected, this is the 17th prayer breakfast that we're going to have this, and Freddie is hosting it at his church. Faith Worship Center out on Bloomfield Road. It's Saturday morning the 26th. All of you are invited. It's a good way to start the year off, and especially pray for our leaders. But the 26th at 8 a.m. is breakfast. 9 o'clock is the service. Brother Lee Watts, the chaplain in Kentucky General Assembly, is our guest speaker. And if you've never heard Brother Lee speak, he's quite a gifted individual when it comes to preaching. But this year's General Assembly is the short session, 30 days. We were in 4 days this past week, and we go back February the 5th for the other 26 days. The short session was originally set up, I think our first session for 2002, I think it was voted on in 2000. 2002 was the first, 2001 would have been the first short session, first odd year session. And it was primarily designed to, look at big issues and to take care of any unfinished business, but it's turned into just almost a normal session. We'll file almost as much legislation and pass almost as much legislation as we do in the regular session. So it's a sprint, not a marathon in the short session. But we got some big issues that we're working on, and Chad will tell you about what's going on in the House. But really the main issues are pretty much the same. School safety. I think everyone would agree that we need to make sure our schools are safe. And House Bill 1 in Chad's chambers is school safety. Senate Bill 1 in the Senate, school safety. And we both chambers have made that our top priority. We've had meetings across the state this summer. We've had a work group that met with a lot of citizens, a lot of school personnel, students and professionals, and came up with basically a somewhat of a four-pronged approach to school safety. The top priority is the school environment, talking about mental health services for our students. About statistics show us that about 20% of our students have some sort of mental health issue. And working with the school environment, having the students, the administrators, and the classified folks, the janitors, the bus drivers. Sorry about that. Bus drivers and cafeteria ladies, a lot of students really relate to them, and just have all those folks communicating and work on to prevent bullying and also suicide prevention. But in every school shooting we've had across the country, there's always been telltale signs that something was about to happen, and we missed them. So we want to work on that school environment to make sure that we have our ear to the ground, and if there's an issue, we can deal with it before it escalates into something far more serious. Securing the front door has been discussed, and we do a good job with that, but we need to do better. Also, securing the classroom doors if the teacher and the students decide to shelter in place, that inside the classroom is safe. And then the fourth thing that we talked about was SROs, the school resource officer, attempting to have a school resource officer in every school. So that's kind of the discussion we've had. Like I said, Senate Bill 1 contains all those elements. I'm pretty sure House Bill 1.
It's identical.
Identical. So again, it's a priority. One of those issues that my first legislative coffee, I don't think we talked about because it's always been a problem since the 60s. Drug abuse and opioid abuse just really didn't get started till about 2010, 2011 when it really started picking up. But we have a serious drug problem with not so much now with prescription drugs, but with heroin, cocaine, and meth. And saw the sheriff come in. I'm sure he can. Where'd he go? There he is. I looked for you to sit down. So I'm sure that's an issue in the court system. I'm sure we're all aware, and most families are aware of the drug issues. We also have a continued, our discussion on pensions. Depends whose estimates you look at, approximately $40 billion in pension debt. And, the only way it's a debt, we owe it. And the only way to get through this mess is to pay off that debt. There's no silver bullet. It's got to be paid. And so to give you a little idea how much money we're talking about to retire this debt, in 2013 we passed Senate Bill 2, which statutorily required us to pay the General Assembly to pay the ARC, our actuarially required contribution for the KERS system. We hadn't paid that in full since 2002, and what happened in 2002, the dot-com, or not dot-com, but I guess it was, the tech bubble had burst, and we had a real downturn in the stock market. And Kentucky was having a tough time balancing their budget. And Paul Patton at the time, his budget director was a young man by the name of Jim Ramsey. Some of you might have heard of him. anyway, he reminded Paul Patton, or made Paul Patton aware that the General Assembly or the state government was not statutorily required to make the full ARC payment. So that's when they started in 2002 making partial payments on the ARC. That was on KERS. And so in 2013, we statutorily required the General Assembly and the governor's budget to pay the ARC. In 2014, we paid $1 billion additional money above and beyond our regular pension payments to the ARC on KERS. That was 5% of our budget. 2016, when Governor Bevin was elected, that's one of his campaign promises is to fully fund the pensions. So in 2016, we also funded the ARC for TRS, teachers retirement, and that year we put in $2.3 billion additional dollars into retirement, 10% of our budget. In this past budget we just completed, we did level dollar funding for KERS, which was an additional $700 million a year. That's part of the problem we've had over the years. We've a lot of different formulas are used, and we showed in Kentucky, part of their calculation is that we had a 4% payroll growth every year. We haven't had a 4% payroll growth since probably 2002, 2003. So it was a number that we were using to artificially keep our payments down. So we went to level dollar, which increased our payments by $700 million a year. And so in this budget we just completed, we put $3.4 billion in that budget for pensions, 15% of our budget. Now, House Bill 151 that the courts found unconstitutional, that was thrown out, and we're back to the drawing board on that. In that budget, or in that Senate bill, we statutorily required ourselves to make the teacher's retirement, statutorily to make the ARC payment to the teacher's retirement. We were not statutorily required to make any additional payments to them other than percentage of payroll. And we also changed that percentage of payroll calculation from a 4% payroll growth to 0. And that was $400 million additional money that we've obligated ourselves to pay in the next budget. So the next budget, we've already obligated ourselves to pay. If we pass another bill like Senate Bill 151, we'll be obligated to pay $4.2 billion. $4.2 billion, that's billion with a B, toward retirement. And that's 20% of our budget. That's a sobering thought, but that's the only way to get out. It'll take us 30 years to pay that off. So that's really, there's not much debate on that. We have to pay that debt off. The only debate is what type of, any changes made to, the current system and changes to the system for new hires. So that debate will continue. And like I said, there's already, I think, close to 100 bills filed in the Senate, close to 200 bills filed in the House. So there's a lot of legislation that will be debated, but those are some of the main considerations. I'll let Chad, I don't want to hog all the time, so Chad can fill you in on the things that I forgot.
So just real quick, House Bill 1, more symbolically than anything, we did file the Senate Bill 1 verbatim. The Senate on the school safety, Senate will run with that, and so hopefully we'll see them kick something down to us pretty quickly. But we really wanted to try to send the message to everybody that, hey, this is a nonpartisan, bipartisan issue, and both chambers really do support seeing what we can do for school safety. Other things coming up in the House, with the changes to the tax laws last time, there's still some things that need to be smoothed out there, so we will have a tax bill that should get filed relatively soon. I know groups in both the Senate and the House are working on that. One of the biggest ones, everybody says we screwed up and we're taxing nonprofits. I get a little defensive there. It wasn't us. It was the Supreme Court. A case came down in March. It just happened to be the timing was right because it's right when we made a tax change. So everybody thinks that it was something that the legislature did. But the Supreme Court changed a little ruling on a definition which allowed the revenue cabinet to say, oh, now we need to tax nonprofits. So hopefully that will be something you see us fix. I know that's important to a lot of groups. Locally, I will tell you this, some of the stuff that we're working on, workforce development is really huge. You know, the chamber is pushing it. It's something that's important to me, and I'm working with Wes Bradley. And what we're really wanting to do is get with the folks, the employers, you know, and say, all right, as kids come out of high school, as they start into college, what does that workforce need to look like so that we can continue, so that Kim can keep doing her job and bringing companies into this county? We've got to have the workforce here ready to go. So I think you'll see some stuff happen on that level. Bourbon industry folks have got some things they really want to see this year, especially on responsibility. That's been a big push from that industry. And I'll tell you, everybody in this town, in this room, understands the importance of that industry for us. But we've still got a little marketing to do with our fellow Kentuckians in the eastern side of the state, where, you know, it's still a dry area. They have issues with bourbon. So focusing on the safety aspect, I think, is important, especially as the shipping has kind of increased, or at least starting to increase with some of the stuff we've done. So I think you'll see a lot happen there. There's also a real big push, and I'd love to hear from you guys on this, on criminal justice reform. Mr. Higdon and I have talked about it a little bit on occasion, but there's two big things that we're hearing from national groups that are, you know, oddly you think Republicans are, you know, usually the ones tough on crime, so to speak. But what we found is that Kentucky incarcerates a higher percentage of its people than in any other state in the nation. And a lot of that incarceration relates to addicts. And so, you know, one topic is, are we doing the right thing the way we've criminalized and the way we're punishing certain behaviors? I'm sure the judge can tell us it's a huge financial burden on the county with all the inmates we've got.
They sit in court sometimes for 60 days, 90 days, 120 days just to go to the court systems to do a deal.
And then the other thing, the big push, in fact, I've got 2 or 3 meetings week after next on it, is bail reform. And one of the problems, and it's almost a practical issue, you know, if I'm the judge in this county and somebody comes in front of me and the question is, am I going to let them out on bail? I'm not real inclined to do it, because if they go back out and they commit another crime, well, now y'all hate me because we, quote, had them in the system and I let them go. And so when you give discretion sometimes, judges, to be safe, err on the side of not exercising that discretion. But what ends up happening then is we have a lot of folks sitting in our jails, costing us a ton of money, who simply are just poor.
You can't bail out, don't have the money to
bail out. They don't have the money to bail out.
The family does.
That's right. And maybe there's an issue about, do they really need to be sitting in jail? You know, the concept of bail had always been to assure your appearance in court. If you go back to 5th grade, what do we all know? You're innocent until proven guilty. And if you are innocent until proven guilty, how can the government deprive you of your liberty as long as you're going to show back up to court? So there's a push, and again, it's kind of a bipartisan nationwide thing to really look at what are we doing with bail. But at the same time, you don't want to be letting folks that are committing crimes necessarily back out on the street. So keep an eye on that. I think that's going to be a big issue that looks like it's starting in the House first.
Is that this session?
Yes, sir.
Good.
It's happening right now.
You're right, it's a national
It is. It's a huge problem, no doubt.
Our jail right now holds about 109 people or so legally. We average about 130 to 150.
Yeah.
Of which probably a large percentage of those people would bail out.
Right.
If they had to bail.
Low risk, non-violent, you know, not repeat offenders, that kind of stuff, and yet they're just stuck
It would
there.
clear our jail out enough that we could manage our facilities without building a new jail.
And that is true across the state at all levels of the jail. So, trying to think what else is coming up. You know, so yeah, go ahead.
On that topic, do you have any track record on California and DC that have already done that? Are they a big increase in crime for people being let out of jail?
I don't off the top of my head, but I guarantee these groups that are pushing this will probably give you more data than you want to know. So if you want to, we can get together later and I can get you their numbers. You know, all the data they show you looks great across the board, not only on what's happening in society, but then on the cost saving as well. It's weird being in leadership now, like I have to see every bill come through, so it's hard to gauge necessarily what's really going to be an issue versus what people's pet projects are that keep coming up. You think of anything else, Jimmy, that's on the horizon?
One of the things we worked on last session, and Chad touched on it, tax reform. That one issue with the nonprofits, we will go back and address that. There was a Villa Hills versus Mason Homes, Masonic Homes, and basically what the court said, that Kentucky law, the only exemption that nonprofits are entitled to is exemption from property tax. So that's where that came from. So once the Supreme Court ruled on that, then the Department of Revenue, and it all happened about the same time where we did the tax reform, and we got credit for that, even though it was not.
I gave you credit for that.
We appreciate that.
Even though you know it could. Well, I won't say that, but anyway, it.
I should give it to Chad.
Okay,
I
anyway,
out of house first.
that's okay. But we will continue, you know, working on our tax system. It is somewhat antiquated. We want to move to a consumption type tax base, and of course we've started to spread out that base with our last reforms, but. We'd like to be more like Tennessee. You know, Tennessee, their economy is really booming, and we think a lot of it has to do with their tax code. They pay 0 personal income tax, and if you ever go there, you know that their sales tax is a little more aggressive than ours. We like I said, we'll never get to 0 personal income tax. It just won't happen because we won't tax food and medicine. And in Tennessee they do. I just don't see that happening in Kentucky. But I do see that we could get to where Indiana was. They were at 3.5%. We can get there. I think they've moved theirs down now. They're about 2.8%. That's what Indiana's personal income tax is. So that's the direction but you won't see, there's too much going on this session. For us to, we need to have a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion about taxation. You know, there's a move to do something with the gas tax to modernize it. It's not generating the revenue that it used to. You know, you look at statistics and miles driven is way up, and consumption of gasoline is down. And that's how we generate you basically, when you go to the gas station right now, you're paying when you fill up, you're paying a toll to drive on Kentucky's roads. And you're paying 18 cents to the federal government, 26.5 cents to the state to go into our transportation budget. That used to be 32.5 cents a gallon, but a couple years ago when the price of gas fell, we'd always capped the increase on the gas tax. We said it could never go up more than a penny or penny and a half, 10%. But we never thought to to keep it from dropping like that. So it dropped 6.5 cents in less than a year. And back in the old days when we had toll roads, Kentucky accumulated a lot of toll credits, and to try to figure that system out, it's clear as mud. But basically what it was, every year we get a federal dollars to build roads. And it's always an 80-20 match. They give us any project you want to do, you can use 80% 80% federal money, then you have to use 20% state money. And what we did for years, we used those toll credits to offset that 20%. We didn't have to put up any state dollars. We used all federal dollars to do the project because we were able, they allowed us to use those toll credits. They're gone. So here, probably the next road budget we do, we won't have any toll credits to fall back on. We'll have to make the 20% match on any federal dollar projects that we build. And there's probably not another county in the state, maybe other than Jefferson, that has the transportation needs that Nelson County has. We could spend we could spend a couple, $100 million here without a doubt to all the transportation needs that we have here. Nelson County has grown so much, and it's a crossroads for a lot of things, and we have a lot of transportation needs. So to fulfill those needs, that's a touchy subject, but it's one that we will have to address sooner or later. So just throw that out there. Again, I don't know I don't think that'll happen this session because it's a conversation we need to have, and we'll talk about that. But yes, sir.
Could I ask a question about the fuel tax?
Yes.
The governor is in favor of adjusting, I don't want to use raising the gas tax. And discussions over the next couple of years, if there's any discussion that would allow an extra penny or two as a local option. For instance, your formula that the state uses now allows counties to get a percentage of that gas tax for our rural roads and rural secondary roads. And I think most counties would be in favor of a mechanism where you would have an option, where the fiscal courts would have an option of initiating an extra penny or two. Trying to get those numbers from the revenue cabinet now, how much money is generated by county on the fuel tax, and that would give us an idea of how much money we're talking about and what the needs are for the county. What do you think about that idea, an extra penny?
That's something we'd certainly consider. That's why we need time to talk about it. A lot of states are looking at a miles-driven formula instead of depending on what type of car you have. Everybody would pay the same. We're a long way from that ever happening because I don't know how you track that.
Oregon's doing it with these. They've got a pilot project going on right now where you have to sign up as part of your driver's license, get on the app, and then you pay your tax.
Is it paid monthly? See, here's the key thing with the gas tax now. You pay it daily, weekly, when you buy your fuel.
Right.
And to try to come up with another tax when your regular tax is due at the end of the year where you get your license plate, it would be very difficult for the average working family to take on that responsibility.
Right.
But one user fee that you probably will see is a user fee on electric cars. Electric cars burn no gasoline, so consequently they're not paying anything to use our highways. So, based on 12,000 miles a year, a gas tax at 26.5 cents a gallon, average fuel consumption of 30 miles to a gallon, it comes out to like $80 or $90 a year. You would have to, electric car owner would have to pay when they got their license renewed. Diane would get to listen to them. No, that's driver's license. No, yeah, county clerk. Yeah, county clerk would get to listen to that conversation.
And the PVA, Barbara would get
they would think their property tax went up too.
Right, based on assessment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing that we looked at, last year, we actually passed it at House Bill 306, was a lot of the user fees associated with transportation. For example, oversized or loads. We had in Kentucky, 2 years ago, we had somebody that was shipping some huge piece of equipment, and it was so large, the only way to get it through the state was we had to shut down I-64, and they had to go backwards up I-64. And every one of our bridges then had to be steel plated over for this machinery to be able to knock the bridge down. And in other surrounding states, it was $50,000 to $100,000 that they would have paid the state for all that. In Kentucky, it was like $600. Because we've not changed our fees since 1978. So there's a whole lot of things that are definitely an increase in revenue. They're not going to hit everyday people. They're going to hit the businesses that are using the roads and putting the wear and tear on. So those kinds of changes need to be looked at and be part of that conversation as well.
We do a lot of, when we pass legislation and somebody, we say we have a new liquor license, and somebody's going to decide, what are we going to charge for that? Literally, they just kind of reach up in there and take a number down, and that's what we charge. There's never been any actuarial studies done on these fees, and that's something that you'll probably see. Gerald Neal in the Senate has filed a bill. We passed an expungement bill a few years ago, and I was adamant that the fee would be $500. There's those that want it to be $100. And my argument was, the Commonwealth of Kentucky and the citizens of Kentucky, when you commit a crime, we have a obligation to, house you in jail, convict you, and we in the court system, we have that obligation. But if you want to get that expunged, the citizens of Kentucky have no obligation to help you get an expungement. That's on you. And so the fee ended up being $500. There's those that want to roll that back. Gerald Neal has filed a bill to do an actuarial study on that to see what it costs. I told him, be careful what you wish for, because I bet you $500 won't touch the cost to do an expungement. If you consider the pension cost in that, no telling what that cost would be.
Getting back to the roads issue, do you all have know whether the western bypass is going to be closer to town or closer to Boston?
We'll flip a coin.
Closer to the airport.
Flip a coin.
I know there's a preferred option. They're not saying yet what it is.
Well, the news that we all have received is they needed more time to study it. And so, there's a good case to be made for both of them. So, we'll wait and see what they've got in mind. And I'm serious. I don't know which way they're leaning. But the last correspondence, they were going to have that done by the end of October.
Yeah, and they moved it to March. We got that email.
Okay.
To March.
I knew they moved it. They wanted more time to study.
Yeah.
So we'll hear in March. So, but that's a good segue.
And actually, I think there'll be another public hearing somewhere along the line.
Maybe something talking about one. And then Matthew had a hand up too. Go ahead, Frank.
I don't think any reasonable person could say that we don't have a pension crisis. But to help kind of gauge the severity of it, has the state received anything from any of the 3 ratings organizations that have downgraded Eminent?
Yeah, it wasn't Moody's. What's the other one? It starts with F.
Actually, there was a story in the Lexington Herald on this recently, where the company that did the rating.
Well, there was an article this morning in the Standard that Randy did, and I thought it was kind of, nothing against your writing at all, but it wasn't clear that there was something really in there.
Yeah, so in the article in the Herald Leader, it was a little misleading. They were only talking about whether or not the court case changed anything the rating was going to do, and the answer was no for this reason. But then when you go on, the report that article was based on actually said, but for the following reasons, yes. What we were told, and this is coming from the executive branch, is that they were looking at it last week and anticipate that we will get dinged on it. They hadn't really done much because they wanted to see what was going to shake out. I think that's probably why there was all that end-of-year stuff.
Do you think they're waiting on this session to conclude before they do anything?
That's my gut, but financial people as well as I do, they're not about to tell you what they're doing,
That's why I wondered if they already told you.
Matthew?
3 things. First, thanks both of you for coming. I always appreciate your candor in these things, so I appreciate it. Number 2, with regard to criminal justice reform, I would encourage, an appropriate study of what intended to be done. I think Kentucky sometimes jumps on the bandwagon of, if it's good for California, like martial law, if it's good for them, it's good for us. And it's only until the wheels, the rubber really starts meeting, they're like, oh, this may not be a great idea. But there are a lot of people in Nelson County Jail sitting there now who are on just surety bonds. Somebody can come sign them out, but typically by the time they get there, the families are just so worn out, and so there's just no other alternative. If they're not there, they're not safe. And so if you administratively release those people, you may be releasing them back into the unknown. So, you know.
And certainly not solving the problem, because now they're going to be going to the ER, and then what do we do?
Exactly, it's a complicated issue.
Well, it is, and you're back to that addiction versus criminal, and the solution there is, again, nobody wants to hear it, but it's going to take more resources. What do we do with those folks?
Yeah, which kind of segues into my third point, and I know, Senator, you have done, you have polled and talked about medical marijuana. Is there a stomach in the legislature to just rip off the Band-Aid and legalize recreational marijuana? You know, it would help a lot of the funding issues that you have. Other states have done it, and I don't know if there's been any kind of studies towards that as kind of an ability to heal a lot of different problems.
But, you know, I've been on record that I would support medical marijuana. It depends what it is. You know, there are those that would like to see medical marijuana really so far that it's really recreational marijuana disguised as medical marijuana, and that's how far some want to go with it. You know, recreational marijuana, I don't think that you'll see out of the Senate any bill dealing with recreational marijuana until the feds release, you know, move it from a Schedule I drug. Now, if they do that, they move it from a Schedule I, you could see some movement, but I don't see any movement in the Kentucky State Senate as long as it's a Schedule I drug as far as recreational marijuana. Now, medical marijuana is another issue. Now, I did file a bill that you've probably seen to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. Right now, law enforcement, when you deal with somebody with a small quantity of marijuana, they have a choice. They can write them a ticket or incarcerate them. And basically what my bill does says they shall write them a ticket. And the main reason for that, you know, I hear all the time that they, you know, they're taking grandma some medical, or taking marijuana to grandma. She has cancer and she's dying, and they're afraid they're going to get arrested. So that was my primary purpose, is, you know, to decriminalize it, where if somebody is in that situation, if we don't pass medical marijuana, if they are in that situation where somebody needs it and they're a good law-abiding citizen, that it won't be any different than a speeding ticket. But again, that's just something that I thought would be and also to relieve some overcrowding. If somebody's booked for possession of marijuana, I really don't know what that process is. If you put them in jail and then they make it through the court system, I really don't understand exactly how all that works. But I do know that if they're incarcerated, the county picks up the tab, probably at least $30 a day.
$32 a day, that rate.
To house somebody. So, and it's for an offense that's legal in many states already. So that's for small quantities, and we've already kind of stepped in that direction when we passed the bill a few years ago. Said that law enforcement could ticket someone who had a small quantity of marijuana rather than arrest them.
What is a small quantity? Are we talking about a joint or 8 ounces?
It was 8 ounces, right? It was kind of
I mean, not that I want to know.
I don't know what the quantity is.
It all depends on your prior history as well. If you got a gentleman that is charged with trafficking in the past or doesn't show up in court, it all depends with our office. But a lot of it is deputy discretion on what they see as a small.
So his bill would be good, I think.
Just be cautious when you take out a Band-Aid to cover this issue, and then you're gonna be raising another Band-Aid later on down the road. That's just on our side as law enforcement, you know, looking in.
Unfortunately, on every piece of legislation, there's unintended consequences. It's just difficult to avoid it.
And Kentucky was a leader in 1978 with pretrial release. Our program in Kentucky was recognized, and we won awards when the new court system changed, and we went from bail bondsmen to pretrial release. Because citizens that didn't have the money, but they had a job, they had a neighbor that knew where they lived, and they were accountable, so they would come back to court. But that system in 40 years, as Matthew said, you know, the people in Frankfurt have decided in the judicial system, not legislative, that, California does it like this, let's try this in Kentucky. So there's so many things that have evolved with that system. It went from being a good, basic, award-winning system to being fixed, a little bit here, a little bit there, let's do it here. Now they have something called a MPR program, where a monitored release program. So the judge lets them out, and the pretrial officers have them check in with them every day to see that they're doing what they're supposed to do. You know, talk about resources. And is it helping? You know, because then people do something, then they're back to jail. So, you know, it's a problem, but we had a good system. I'm not real sure what happened to it, but over the years I've watched it get watered down.
Yeah. Matthew, real quick, back to your comment. The other thing to be cautious of, there's a perception that if we legalize marijuana, the revenue is we'll be swimming in it. The reality is, even states like Colorado that have a much larger consumption of it than we would have, it's 100 to 150 million. And yeah, don't get me wrong, that's a lot of money. That's a drop in the bucket of our actual problems. And then you start to say, okay, what other problems now might arise from that? So there's no real appetite in the House as well for the recreational. The House appears to have the votes for the medical, at least if you listen to the sponsor of the bill. But keep in mind, as the senator said earlier in the conversation, we don't tax medicine. So that's not going to be a revenue generator for the state of Kentucky. You know, a lot of people I hear that argument, oh, you got to pass that medical marijuana, we need the tax revenue. No, there won't be tax revenue from that. So we'll see where that goes. I don't know that it's something's got to happen. But unfortunately, until the feds do something, you know, my wife's a doc. She can't prescribe you pot. You know, it's illegal. So even if we make it legal, she still can't prescribe it. She would lose her medical license. So you get into all these fictions of, okay, the doctor will suggest it or do this or do that. Thane, did you have a question or did you just want to make that comment? Okay, I see you had your hand up.
Senator, I'm going to go back to marijuana if I could.
We get that on record.
Yes. I've been, you know, dealing with a health issue for years with the doctor. You go to the doctor. A lot of those folks are using marijuana today in Kentucky. They're going to other states to get it, bringing it back or whatever. And most certainly medical marijuana is, I think, it was a no-brainer to me. But more importantly, when Matthew was talking about recreational marijuana, Kentucky's always last in doing these kinds of things, really, to be honest with you. And it's going to come, just a matter of when and how, and so I think it will. We as a society have taken those kinds of things like marijuana. People are going to try and experiment with whatever's available. And we've taken the marijuana, which is my book, is the least of society's problems, and driven these folks into heroin, cocaine, because and the appeal. Kentucky did a great job getting appeals off the street as far as a lot, you know, at the prescription drugs, and the pain management centers did well with those. But we've kind of driven the young people. Young people are going to try things now. You don't think so? They're just going to try things. We've driven people to heroin and other addictions because marijuana is not available. That's my theory.
Anybody else?
People try.
On a different subject, talking about tax reform, and the judge mentioned this with the gas tax, but is there any appetite looking at that to revisit the local option sales tax options?
You know, we talked about doing that as part of an overall tax scheme, and you know, that it's kind of lost its luster over the years. There was you know, the support was I guess an inch deep. It takes a constitutional amendment to do that. You know, it's still out there. You talk about there was a proposal a couple years ago for a local option sales tax up to 2%. I think
1% on the lift,
Yeah.
the local
Local.
option or something, can't remember that one.
It had to be
Had to be earmarked for a
specific
project and had to
Right.
have a sunset rule.
And so that was kicked around, and we talked about doing it when we did tax reform. So, we're still in that tax reform, I guess, cycle, and but you don't hear a whole lot about local option sales tax. You don't. It's just not a subject that comes up very often.
And really, it's a shame because I know I'm taking a lot of airtime here, but that 1 cent additional tax within 2 years would pay for that road that the city wants in the county. 2 years, 5.2 million would come into to us for that. So it has a value somewhere along the line. The state wouldn't have to worry about it.
But again, like I said, the support, we just haven't, there was that one push, and then just haven't heard much about it since then.
I got a couple of different questions here. I just want to say as well, I appreciate you guys coming out and fielding these questions from the public. I think there's a lot of folks. And I want to congratulate you both on your reelection as well.
Thank you.
But following up on the marijuana issue, as I'm married to a person that deals with a chronic illness every day. So I think there's a lot of hope. A lot of people are hoping that comes to fruition. But actually, I had a question about House Bill 13. Are you familiar with it? Because I couldn't. It was the fire protection, talking about raising the, and I was a little confused about the wordage of it. It sounded like they were going to raise the 15 cents, or from 10 cents to 15 cents.
10 cents to 15 cents.
10 to 15 cents and a maximum of 25 cents. And I didn't know if that applied to just the fire district or ambulance districts, or how that was
I'll be
supposed to
honest,
go.
I haven't seen it at all. I'd have to go back and read the sponsor. Rothenberger did? Okay.
Shelbyville?
Yeah,
Yeah.
former judge, yeah.
And also, to add a little weight to the judges talking about the gas tax, I mean, some of them roads over in our district are like the roads to Beirut, those secondary roads, so it would be nice to get a little extra revenue, and I sure wouldn't mind paying 3 cents on a gallon.
We don't even have enough money to repave the roads we have. We're losing 500 miles a year just on repaving. And that doesn't talk about building something that we might need to build.
Right.
It's crazy how far behind we are in infrastructure. I was on a bipartisan committee the last 2 years that looked at every bit of this stuff. And our bridges, our river ports, our rail stations, I mean, we are falling apart.
Right, I agree.
It's
Just,
bad.
I've got you right there on that.
Yeah.
The bridge projects, is that going to be this year that they're going to start on the bridge projects?
The ones out in Bloomfield?
The ones out in Bloomfield, yes.
I thought so. My understanding was September, but don't hold me to that. Let me check
The
on
one out
that.
downtown, and then they have the one out on Depot Street, which is really scary.
Yeah.
That's in a different program, Eric. That's in
It's a
the,
different program.
that's in a different program where you guys funded, at the last General Assembly, you funded 1,000 bridges or whatever around the
Right,
state.
that's.
And that bridge is in that, but I don't know where it stands.
Thank you, guys.
I'll find it.
Will there be more money put in state parks, substantially more money? I hear they're deteriorating.
Yeah, we just met with the state park folks. Again, it's been, Kentucky has kicked the can down the road on about 1 million things, and this is one. We've got millions and millions and millions of dollars of unfunded maintenance that we just didn't do on our state parks for the last how many years. And so now we've got roof leaks. I saw pictures from Jenny Wiley. They've got beams holding up a covered walkway that are literally split in half. They've had to condemn it and shut part of it down. The parks are trying to come up with a solution to it, so stay tuned. I think they've got some ideas. But
We appropriated or approved $10 million a year in bonding for the parks, which is was very beneficial to the Stephen Foster story. They received $250,000 from that, which was great. That's just a drop in the bucket to what they need. One of my arguments, and definitely my old Kentucky Home's not on this list. We have some parks in the state that they really should look at. Do they need to be state parks? Should they be more? Turn them over to the local governments to take care of. we have a lot of golf courses that back in the golf course boom days, we built a lot of golf courses that are just not getting the play that they need to justify keeping them open. So some tough decisions need to be made. I've made the recommendation several times to do we had, the federal government did BRAC, Base Realignment Committee, where they looked at all the Army bases in the country to decide which ones they were going to keep open and which ones would be a priority. And that's what we really need to do right now. We need to prioritize our parks, and those that we decide are a priority, we need to get them up to date. But you know, I haven't. That's been a suggestion. I haven't had any takers on it much yet. But that would be my suggestion, is to, when we do this next budget cycle, we're going to appropriate money to do, you know, work on the parks. It'd be more than the 10 million that we've done. But,
I think if
and
we
we
did
tried.
recreational marijuana.
Actually, that was a real good start. I thought it was $20 million total.
Right. But we did the public-private partnerships, P3s, and we really thought that that would be a good deal. You know, we'd have a Hyde or somebody to come in and go to a state park and build a resort, lease it from the state park. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Missouri Chateau on the Lake. Any of you been there? It's on Tabletop Lake in Missouri. It's a privately owned hotel on a state property, and the place it's a 4-star hotel, and it's quite a place. But that's the kind of thing we kind of envisioned when we did the P3s. What we got was Kentucky Wired, which is a public-private partnership, but the public part got stuck with all the bills. The profit went to the private part. So enough said on that.
I think Secretary Parkinson told me the last time we talked that there's like 200 million liability, maintenance liability in the state park. So you're 10 million, like you say, it doesn't go very far.
They got to paint a bunch of stuff, and that's about all.
10% for the first year, though. I mean, the first 2 years. So you
We
got to
have
start somewhere.
we have some beautiful state parks. We do.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Most of them do not operate in the black. Most every one of them. I think there was just a couple that operated in the black, and one of those was Dale Hollow. I really don't need that. That's the only one I recall right off that operated in the black. The rest of them operated in the red. They did not generate enough revenue to pay the expenses.
But they've got, you know, some things they showed us last week. Most folks, how do you get a hotel nowadays? State parks weren't on there. They are now. So they're already starting to see, by getting on a Travelocity and all those little sites, they're seeing a bump in the room booking rates and that kind of stuff. So hopefully they're modernizing a little bit.
One other thing, we'll stick around a little while after this, after we conclude here in a few minutes. I know some people have questions for us but don't like to ask them in a public setting, so we'll stick around. But we've got a few more minutes. Certainly entertain some more questions if you've got some. If not, we'll.
Senator, one more.
All right.
I promised Barbara a few minutes ago I would be quiet, but I broke my promise. There is a mechanical problem with the pension spiking rules from state law, and we just experienced that for probably the 4th or 5th time here recently. In an election process, one of our magistrates got beat in an election and went ahead and signed up for his retirement. And because he had had some additional training during that second half of the year, magistrates qualify for about, depends on their tenure in office, $4,000 a year in additional pay. So that $4,000 went in on his average, and the pension spiking group kicked that out, and so his last year in the pension system wasn't even counted. But there are some other flaws dealing with when people retire few other things. So like mechanically, need to talk about that somewhere along the line.
Okay, well, now's the time to talk about it, but,
I'll get you some
in the
details.
next little bit. But those rules were put in strictly for spiking
Oh, yeah.
purposes.
Give people raises at the end of their tenure, yeah.
And we had, primarily in emergency services, where you have ambulance and fire that work on, they work 24 hours and they're off 48 and they're back 24. So a lot of them had two jobs. They worked two jobs, and so, their spike was, the spike on their pension was way up here. And there was no incentive for local governments to go out and find somebody, that hired a different person. They just kind of kept it in-house, and as long as somebody wanted to work that overtime, that was fine. So now, as they're starting to get that's coming down, they see what it's costing the pension system. They're not.
I'll send you some information.
They're not doing that as often.
Yes, sir.
All this talk about pension problems, how does our state rank? You're also concerned about workforce development. Schools do that. How do we rank in the nation in Kentucky? In other words,
As far as like how good the school, like.
Right.
their results, the school efficiency, educating, or is it a number that nobody wants to talk about, or is it
one of the things that they look at is dropout rate and some ACT scores, and I think the last figure we saw was like we were 20th in the country, but it doesn't matter. You can look at a lot of different statistics, and I'm sure that some statistics, we're not doing that well. And one of the things we've done poorly, I think a lot of schools have done poorly over the years, is that workforce development piece. Having students prepared to go into the workforce. Now, we are putting a lot of emphasis on that. I know here in Nelson County, their area technology center is really working to get kids into school-to-work programs, apprenticeships. So the last time we were there, and it's been a while, so forgive me, 6 months since I was talked to the ATC, but our new superintendent here hired a young lady that worked with the Department of Education in Frankfurt, Laura Arnold. And so Wes brought her in, and she's working with technical education, and she is very good. And I think they're really starting. We're going to have a world-class program here at the Nelson County ATC, where you take. I think that really one of what CARE did years ago when CARE came in the 1990s. We decided that every kid was going to go to college. And that's what we've done over the last 30 years, is prepare kids to go to college. And those, we know that 50% of them are not going to go. And we really didn't do a lot for those students. So, and it's our own fault. I mean, we let it happen. But that's what we did. Now we're starting to see as the economy's picked up, and I think it was 11 million baby boomers a day are retiring. Some statistic like that. So as you start to see folks our age starting to leave the workforce, and young folks we need younger people to take our place. They're just not there. They're not.
right? Schools manufacturing snowflakes.
Well, but the Area Technology Center, some of the programs that they're doing, I think that is the future of developing our workforce. What they're doing.
I was at a meeting yesterday, and it's actually been system-wide, is the effort within the Nelson County School System. I've been at a meeting, there's probably 80 educators and local business people together, and we're working on a 4-month plan to institute learning for workforce development in a much different way than we've ever looked at it before. And a lot of it's going to be teachers out into the workforce, observing, seeing what are the needs for the students, and then also students co-oping, not just very technical schools.
Right.
And it's even going into the elementary level. And it's really encouraging because it's all workforce development based. And a total change from the traditional side of educating students. And that room was packed. It was like, I would say 80 if not 100. This group of us are going to work for the next 4 months on that program.
And you have a co-op students, right?
I have one right now and one we just hired. So we've been doing this for years, but it needs to get out to the community on a much larger scale.
It needs to be statewide too.
And, you know, in Nelson County, you have 2 great superintendents. Chad and I have met with both of them, and they are top notch. And I think, you know, and then you have Bethlehem. Education in Nelson County is way above. You have some great leadership. So,
I know your time's limited, gentlemen.
I thought you were saying time's up.
It's like what's really the possibilities of pension reform during this short session? Do you expect legislation to be considered, or are you looking down the road for a special session perhaps?
So yesterday, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before, the bipartisan, bicameral pension group started their meetings.
Right.
You know, my hope is truly that their deadline is February 15th. I'd love to see some ideas, a path. I hope everybody gives them their input and participates in that. The last time this was top-down driven,
right,
and this one will be bottom-up.
Okay.
I'm on that work group, and our goal, you know, is to pass legislation this session, but we're not painting ourselves in a corner, because every time you hear, if you watched, you'd have to be boring stuff, but if you watched the Kentucky Chamber, you saw Speaker Osborne speak. It was on KET the other night. So, but he said, you know, it might be, you know, next year before we get it done. But when we do it, we want to do it right. We'll make sure that. I thought we had it right this time, but we didn't. The courts thought different. Yes.
Speaking about the education thing, what kind of structured formal skills assessment is actually being done? Because the skills that are going to be needed 15 years from now is much different than the skills that are needed today because of technology. So is there a structured skills assessment going on for the future? The jobs are going to be coming into, 10 years from now, this will be the number of jobs that will be coming into this skill set that's going to be needed that will be looked at?
Yeah, Mayor may be able to answer this better, but in my conversations with Wes and Ryan, my understanding is for the first time ever, that's what we're looking for the business input on. What do you want that are out there where the rubber meets the road? What do you need? What's going to be coming down the pipe? Now, what can we, transitioning back to the school, what can we do to start, okay, so the kid who's in the 3rd grade, we know he's going to be the worker you need 15 years from now. How do we get that person along that path to that great job, that great career? So that's definitely part of it. And there's a Project Lead the Way stuff is huge, important part of all that curriculum.
Because most of the industries are projecting out 10 and 15 years.
Right.
And that's really what you need.
And instead, we've never projected that at all. We've just continued to, you're going to go to school, Did you have something to add, please?
The Nelson County Chamber of Commerce has implemented a program. It's the Talent Pipeline Management System. And I was fortunate enough to get to study that program and to bring it back to Bardstown. We're one of 4 states that was selected in the United States. So we're really fortunate. So we're bringing some of those things back, and exactly what you're talking about. It's employer-led. So where the employers are leading the way and telling us what they need and assessing those needs, and then we're bringing that back to the school system. We've started that program. We're actually working with NAGO right here with NICA, and so we've already got that program started. It's going to be a process. It's not going to be overnight, but I think that we're going in the right direction.
And part of that is, let's say we've got a pathway now, I always use robotics as my example of robotics. At some point, the kids are going to kind of self-select. Some kids are going to want to get into the coding aspect of it, and other kids are more, they want to build something, And so we've got to find in the school system a way to keep them on that path, then give them the option to go where their interests lie, so that we end up helping everybody. The ones that definitely know they want to go to college versus the ones that really want to get out there and start doing it. And that's part of the whole thing.
And all of our school systems are doing things with workforce. We're going around everywhere here in Bardstown, Nelson County, in every single one, and we're actually building that pipeline and putting them all together now. So, yeah.
My
grandson graduated last year from Bullitt County, and he's enrolled at U of L, didn't want to go, he's not a book guy, he's a hands-on guy.
Yeah.
And he's, through a state program, he's at Clarion Chemical, and they send him to class 2 days a week.
Awesome.
And then he works 3, and when he's not in school, he works 5 days a week. Gets a decent salary, plenty of benefits, but it's really a great program for guys. He's got a great brain, he just don't care nothing about books.
Right.
And they taught him to weld, they taught him the computer end, the electrical end.
That's right.
The hydraulic end, I mean.
It used to be shop class.
Yeah.
But the problem is we've got to update.
But he's got a bright future now.
Right.
And he don't have to read all these boring books about poetry and.
One of the, probably,
program.
Yeah.
probably an 8th grader today, the jobs that he or she will do haven't even been, they don't even exist yet. And another thing that we've recently passed in the General Assembly was work-ready scholarships. So a student, if they go into, it's a last dollar scholarship, it's not first dollar, but it's last dollar if you get your financial aid and your KEYS money. But it will pay for a 2-year program at any of the KCTCS schools in five categories. So that's that's one of our problems too. We need to work on is a lot of our students complete college and they've got so much debt that they can't afford to go to work because they go to work and somebody garnishes their wages about 6 weeks after there. So they stay in the basement at mama's house.
This program, they pay you for 5 days, even though you're only working 3.
Wow.
And the other 2 days that you get paid for pays for your schooling plus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good program.
Yeah.
Well, it's last question, Sheriff.
Retirement.
Yes, sir.
What are the chances of bringing in the guys that are in the 401k phase of the retirement into a place like the old Tier 1, and I know it wouldn't be Tier 1 because we have Tier 2, to create an incentive for guys to be in our field, law enforcement, first responders, that is going to have a retirement. You look at a young man that wants to be in law enforcement, but not looking to it because he's not going to get a retirement. He's looking at a 401k and
You can get that anywhere.
that's not for them. Right now, we don't have an issue with retention or bringing guys in. But at the end of the day, I see a problem getting guys to come into the law enforcement field because there's no retirement, there's no end of a career.
We're having problems in every profession. Law enforcement, teachers, there's a shortage. It doesn't matter who you talk to. There's a shortage. And I agree, somewhere down the road, we're going to have to address, the hazardous duty retirement. But the problem with a defined benefit retirement plan is you cannot control the cost. There's too many moving parts. And that's why you see us trying to go to these hybrids and cash balance type plans, because you can control the cost and the liability. And that's where we find ourselves today in the mess we're in. Part of it is the legislator's fault, about 20% underfunding. But there's a whole list of issues, people living longer and actuary numbers that really weren't sound and providing benefits that we don't fund, and just the list goes on and on and on. It's really difficult to control a defined benefit pension plan, to control the cost over time. There's just so many issues. So, I think one of these days we're going to be back to the drawing board looking at hazardous duty.
I would suggest somebody hits that drawing board real quick.
Well, it's
gonna hit, and it's gonna hit little towns that are no longer little, and trying to bring in guys to a field to serve and protect, it's gonna be very tough.
like I said, it's one of our many pressing issues, and usually what happens, there's so many issues in the General Assembly, we end up dealing with the ones that are, I guess we wait till they kind of get out of hand before we deal with them. And not because it's intentional, it's just supply and demand, there's just so much demand for change in legislation that just,
I get that, but at some time or another, we have to be proactive instead of reactive on the change. You guys talked about the safety of our schools. My office has implemented a schedule, and we're stopping at schools throughout the county. I didn't know we had under 25. We got 22 or 23 schools, including the private schools. The sheriff's office is stopping at all the schools. So we're working with BJ at the Nelson County School Board as the SRO. We're also working with Barstown. So we have to be proactive in dealing with the situations. And I think this is a prime example that needs to be dealt with.
well, like I said, I understand that it could, could be an issue. Thank you all, and like I said, we'll stick around. If anybody wants to bend their ear, we'll be here for a while. Thank you all for coming. I really do appreciate you taking the time to be here. Thank you.